Let's close off the discussion of women's rights with a few legal documents that secure the rights of women in a highly patriarchal society, plus a lesson on education. This is Rabbi Yossi Madvig, and you're listening to Jews Did It First. Thanks so much for tuning in and listening. I hope you subscribe and leave a comment in the comment section down below if you're on YouTube, or leave a review. Whatever it is, it really helps. And I just want to mention again, of course, if you want to contribute to the podcast, please go to jewishoswego.org/Jews Did It First. Click on the Make a Donation button in the upper right-hand corner, especially because I could really use some new equipment to make this podcast a little bit better. I've even started thinking of adding some video elements to it for the YouTube section, but I can't do that without your support. Anyway, as I mentioned last week, Jews seem to be the first culture to give proper respect to women, both spiritually and physically. When many cultures in ancient and biblical eras treated women as property, the Jews required consent for marriage and divorce. They gave women a prominent role in society and family life, even though it's not exactly the same in the religious role, but nevertheless. And as I briefly mentioned last week, they help secure women's rights and property in the marriage. And this is what I want to focus on this week to close off this topic of women. Now, I will say, we'll get into this in a little bit, it is a little matter of contention as far as were Jews the first to ever do it in society. So this is debatable. I'll get into that in a second. But I just want to go back in time in the Wayback Machine, and there seems to be. We'll go back to ancient Egypt, because ancient Egypt is really this hotbed of culture and civilization in the world. It is pretty interesting. A lot of things that we find in modern society can be found in one form or another in ancient Egypt. One of the very interesting things in doing the research is there seems to be not so much information with regard to the act of getting married. There were always, there's legal documents that say, identify a woman as the wife of so-and-so. And it'll attest to a divorce. If you get later on in Egyptian culture, Ptolemaic Egypt, there's documents, or there's historical evidence of elaborate parties and so on. But when you get all the way back to ancient Egypt, times of the Pharaoh, very, very little to be said there, if anything. Now, certainly you assume that there was a point where they were not married, and now they are married. So what was that point? We don't really know. But we do know is they did have marriage contracts. And so what I really want to get into is the concept of marriage contracts and also divorce. So there were basically two contracts, in two types of contracts in ancient Egypt. First of them, which is probably one that you're more familiar with, is where the man gives a certain amount of money to the woman so she'll become his wife, or to the wife's family, or something like that. And in fact, most marriages in ancient times, almost all of them, were with dealt with the parents. Okay, the parents made the marriage happen. The two people involved weren't necessarily number one in the picture. That's something important to consider, especially because when it comes to Jewish law, as soon as that girl is of age, it is really her choice, yes or no. And interestingly enough, I'm not quite sure if this existed in ancient cultures. I'd have to really do a little more digging, but certainly in Jewish law, even if for some reason, because it was an ancient culture and this was practiced, is a woman could, or before she's a woman, a girl could be given over to marriage while she's still a child. And that would, of course, fall into the purview of the parents arranging the marriage, accepting the dowry, the ksuba, as it were, or at least the money for it. We'll get to the ksuba later. That's a different thing. Accepting the price for the betrothal, that would go to the parents if she was still a child. Now, Jewish law does discourage such behavior. However, it was technically legal according to Jewish law. Now I don't believe it is. It's been rabbinically prohibited, like I said, but at least at a certain point in history. Even then, according to Jewish law, the girl can go and make a declaration. It was called a mo'ain, which was a refutation, so to speak, basically saying, no, I do not want to be married to this guy. So she can get out of it even as a young girl. She has to make a legal declaration. So that is quite interesting. Most other cultures, women, as we mentioned, even when they were already older and of age, were treated as property. And in Jewish law, not the case. Once she's of age, she is her own person. And like I said, even as a child, she can still get out of certain things like that. So anyway, what was it that was given? So now we have what's called a kasuba or a ketubah, which is a marriage a document. It basically delineates our rights of what we owe the woman, what the man owes the woman in the marriage. And of course, if he's not living up to that, then we've got trouble. Now in ancient Egypt, when this would happen, you would give this similar to a ketubah. So these payments were really not very much. He gives, there's a certain amount of money that's owed to the wife. And if the marriage dissolves, then that money is given back. So like, for instance, if the woman decides to divorce the man, then she has to return this money. She has to pay. And if he wishes to divorce her, so then he has to pay her also as a fine. Now, even on the high end, that amount was 2 silver deben. That's the high end, okay, which is a very small amount of money. How much, will you say? Well, I wasn't sure either when I first saw that, so I looked it up. And it basically, first of all, it's definitely not enough money to deter a divorce or even to provide the woman with any means to support herself. Just to give you an idea, that is about 6.5 ounces of silver worth. Now, most ancient currencies went based on what's the price of silver, sometimes copper, but let's go with silver. It's easier. So what would that be? 6.5 ounces of silver. That would be worth a little over $100. We are not talking big money here. Now, by contrast, a Jewish kesubah mandates a minimum of 200 zuz, or 200 dinar. That's a minimum. The other was the max. This is the minimum in Jewish law, which is around 25 ounces of silver. That's a lot more. Now, with silver price today, that's basically around $400. The truth is that's based on, like I said, the silver price today, but the average price of silver historically is around $20 to $30. Sometimes it really spikes, and it's gone up. In 1980, it was over $100 for an ounce of silver. Even a few years ago, less than a decade ago, it was up like $50-something. But we'll go with, say, $20, $20 to $30. So that could be anywhere from $540 to $750 bare minimum. Also, something to keep in mind is that's really not keeping up with inflation. Okay, you figure that money used to go a lot farther in the past, and that could mean a significant increase. So just to show you what I mean, the price of silver in 1918, 100 years ago. All right, it's good. 100 years ago to what you go up 100 years, and it's also good because it was about the same price as it is today. Somewhere between, right now it's about $16.50 for an ounce of silver. It was about, depending on where you were in 1918, it was anywhere from $15 to $17. So that's about $400. All right, a little over maybe. So about $400 in 1918. 100 years later, today in 2018. That's worth $6.5 grand, okay? So according to Jewish law, you could be forking over a lot of cash, depending on the value of the currency at the given day. So it's pretty significant. The equivalent of $6,500 would definitely give a person pause when thinking about dissolving a marriage. If they're done, unfortunately, these days, marriages can be dissolved over some pretty silly things. Obviously, they can get dissolved over some very serious things, of course. Now, the second type of of contract that was done in ancient Egypt, that is what was called a maintenance contract. And that sort of spells out what he has to spend on the wife with regards to food and clothing and living quarters and all that sort of thing. Any material goods that the husband needs to give to the wife. And anytime she wants to leave, she may do so, but he then has to give her the money, excuse me, or continue to support her afterwards. And sometimes there was an out for the husband if she committed adultery, but usually the contracts required him to continue supporting her, even if he's the one who wants the divorce, and if she's the one who wants the divorce, and whatever. It's that was just the way it went. Interestingly enough, these maintenance contracts, the husband would kind of pledge his entire property as a guarantee that he'll keep his promise. So like if he doesn't fork over the cash, then she gets control over his property. So that is some, even when we're talking kind of a smaller amount of money in some of these instances, there is some assurance there. But it was a little strange, the whole system, how it worked out. Now, you might say, well, if ancient Egyptians took care of their women pretty well, and they had sort of these societal ramifications for women's rights and property in the marriage, so why do you say that Jews did it first? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Although I will admit, this is definitely a debatable point. One is that I don't necessarily make the claim that we're the first humans ever to do something. Okay, a few times on this program, that's not the case. Many times it is the case. As far as the research that I've done that I can tell, I'm certainly happy to see evidence to the contrary. As some people say, I forget where the quote comes from exactly, but I may be wrong, but I'm not lying. So to my knowledge, I'm telling the truth. But sometimes in us people living in modernity, so to speak, we think that we created so many ideas or things that were born out from the Enlightenment, while modern history does seem to have a lot of great ideas and a lot of advancements. Ancient societies were doing a lot of the things that we think of as modern. And the Jews, even if they weren't necessarily the first people to do something, we were among the first. And I use first to sort of mean before modernity. So before we came along on the scene and were doing all these things, there was a time before time, so to speak. And even before Greek and Roman culture were doing the same things. And also, by the way, an interesting point is that ancient Egypt is gone. The people living in Egypt, they're not even their descendants. And their laws and culture aren't the same. In fact, it's more based on Islam, which is a much newer phenomenon on the grand historical scheme. The Jews today, however, are the descendants of the ancient Jews, and our laws are the same. So the Jews are really the only representatives of prehistory and antiquity that are around today. So in that sense, what the heck? Jews did it first. Another issue is that ancient Egyptian marriage seems to have been a social and economic arrangement, but not necessarily a legal one. At least in theory, a woman needed her parents' permission to marry, which is another interesting point, like I mentioned earlier, all the way up until almost 100 years after the Exodus story. So, whatever. But again, it wasn't a legal thing per se. In Judaism, it is very much a legal thing. Jewish law mandates this document, so much so that if it's lost or destroyed, the married couple cannot be together anymore, not even for an hour, until a new one is procured. The biggest thing, I think, though, is the divorce. And let's take a look, going back to ancient Greece. So both the husband and wife could initiate the divorce. The husband pretty easy. He just basically had to send his wife away, back to her father's house or something. For the wife to go and get the divorce, she had to appear before the archon, which is like sort of the main judge or magistrate. And you could even, other people could actually dissolve the marriage as well in ancient Greece, which I think is pretty interesting. First, you had the father of the bride could do it. Apparently, there's only one example that's recorded by some people whose names I can't pronounce. Demosthenes had made a speech against Spudius. I don't really know much about that. You could look that up. And this was really permitted if the wife didn't have any children, right? If the husband, if there was no children from the marriage, the father could go and dissolve the marriage. Also, if the woman became an epicleris, which is basically the father didn't have any male descendants, so she's it, right? So then the closest male relative on when the father dies was allowed to end her current marriage in order to marry her himself. So that's something interesting with the divorce proceedings of ancient Greece. And if, of course, she was found to have committed adultery, then the husband had to divorce his wife. And sometimes to avoid scandal, they would maybe not do that rule. But here's the key, is that upon the divorce, the husband has to give back the wife's dowry, right? So similar to the ksuba, what is that doing? What is that marriage contract, the ksuba, doing? Is the same. It's basically an incentive against divorce. And then upon the divorce, you have to give it back. Okay, and if he doesn't, then there's sort of all these punishments and fine. He has to pay like 18% interest annually on it. This is in ancient Greece. In Rome, if the husband initiated the divorce, he also has to return the full dowry. And it was often suggested to him that maybe he should keep it in a separate account, so that way there's no problem. But what is interesting is it seems that legally, and in ancient Egypt as well, either party could initiate this divorce, and no real reason needed to be given. And especially in ancient Egypt, as I said earlier, that the fine was so paltry that it's not really much of a deterrent. We're talking, what would we say, about $100? That's really not a whole lot to do over there. So what did Judaism develop? Well, in the Bible, in Deuteronomy 24, it says that he has to write her a bill of divorce over there, a sefer krisus, a scroll of separation, and that is the bill of divorce. It's called a get. And unlike other ancient cultures, where they could sort of dissolve the marriage and then done, the Jewish husband has to give an official document of divorce. Now, this helps protect the woman in a few ways. One of the ways is that if he tries to get out of paying her what she's owed, she shows the get and says, nope, I have a get, so you owe me, right? He might try and say, oh no, we're still married. Nope, I've got a get. That's not going to fly. And it's signed by witnesses, by the way. It's not just a piece of paper that he gives her. It could be written on anything legally, but it is actually something that two witnesses have to sign. I've actually sat on a Jewish Beis Din, a Jewish court, in order to administer a get, and I've been one of the signed witnesses of a get. It's happened a couple of times. So it's a very involved procedure and really, really protects the woman. Sometimes it could be a little bit odd for the woman to receive this get, and even for the husband it could be kind of a weird thing, and it should be. You should feel bad about the dissolution of a marriage. It's not something that we like. We like to see marriages be successful and a loving family environment, and when it's not, it should be awkward and it should be a little sad. But it really helps to protect the woman, and when she does, when that divorce happens, so she's owed in the ksuba. And like I said, the Jewish ksuba at a bare minimum is much stronger than the ancient Egyptian one at its maximum. So there is an issue that can and does arise, and that is if the husband does not agree to give the get. So the woman is somewhat stuck in Judaism because it has to be the divorce has to be administered by the man to the woman. There is no get given from the woman to the man in Judaism. So that would mean she wouldn't be able to remarry. She couldn't collect on what she's owed. It's a big problem. So in that situation, the court, the Jewish court, has legal authority to harass, to ostracize, and even beat the husband until he complies and gives her this get. That can become difficult in non-Jewish societies where, the Jewish court can face some legal repercussions for ordering the beating of someone. Actually, I think there was a case recently where there was some issues where a guy wasn't giving a divorce in New York City, and basically some guys came to kind of harass him or rough him up a little bit. And I don't remember the story exactly. You can look it up, but it does try to get carried out. Again, it is a problem. And, no system is absolutely perfect, because we're humans and humans get involved. And even though we believe, yes, this is a godly system, this is what God instituted and God is perfect, not humans. And so God gave us his perfect system for us imperfect beings to carry out. But all in all, I do want to say a little something quickly on marriage, and that is that marriage is a wonderful system. It doesn't matter what culture you're talking about. The invention of marriage is the system in history that protects women's rights. It allows children to be brought up in the best possible way. It tries to deter men from acting on their base, lewd instincts without damaging their reputation or bank account. And, it's really the best thing for women and children, and it's sad that in many Western countries, it seems to be the institution of marriage seems to be trying to be undermined by people who say that it's unnecessary or that it's detrimental or that it's sexist or this, that, and the other. It's just simply not true. Are people bad? Do people do bad things within the context of marriage? Sure. Of course they do, but that the institution itself is bad? No, that's just sheer utter nonsense. And I'm very proud of the fact that when it comes to the protecting of women's rights in a legally binding way, Jews did it first. This week's Torah portion is called Emor, which means speak. It's a command. The first line of it, God says to Moses, "Speak to the priests, Aaron's sons, and say to them." Now, there's a general rule that nothing in the Bible is repetitive. Now, you may laugh at that because there seems to be a lot of repetition in the Bible, but this is actually parsed out very particularly in the Talmud, and what each seeming repetition is coming to add, why it's there, what it teaches us, and so on. And here we have also a double phrase here. It says, "Speak to the priests," "Emor el hakohanim," and then it says, "Va'amarta alehem," you should say to them. So why, and those come from the same root, amar. Emor, amarta. Why is it repeating it? Speak to the priests and say to them. And it even mentions B'nai Ahar, the sons of Aaron. So Rashi, one of the foremost commentators there, he says that the double expression here, speak and say, means that in addition to the standard meaning of the text, obviously that, tell the priests to observe the following stuff, also tell the adult priests, the adults, that they have to teach these things to the children. And this is a very profound statement, although it may not seem so. But it is incumbent upon the adults to teach the children. It says here in Rashi, it doesn't just say the adult priest to the kid priest. Priest is implied, But really, he just makes a general statement. He just says, if I can find it in here, where is it? Oh, here we go. Lahazhir gedolim laktanim. That the adults have to teach, have to lahazhir, warn the children. And I think that the reason it's said so generally is because this is a general in life. We have actually a rule of Limud Torah. We have to, or Talmud Torah. Sorry, we have to teach children Torah. But this is, I think, going beyond that. I think the reason this is said so generally, and we know that Jews are called priests, are called a nation of priests, mamleches kohanim, so this doesn't necessarily just have to apply, at least in a homiletical sense, does not have to just apply to the priests themselves. Lahazhir gedolim ala katanim, that the adults have to teach the children. I deal with college students, and if you're one of those college students listening, please, maybe take what I say with a grain of salt, so you don't get too offended. I'm not trying to offend here, but the truth is, when you're 18 years old, 20 years old even, and your whole life has been sort of being given whatever your parents have to give you, you haven't really gone out into the world, you haven't built anything, you haven't produced anything, you're a child. You're a child, and your job, being in school, is to learn. You are to absorb the knowledge. Now, some of the things that are being taught in college these days, I'm not sure are worth absorbing so much. But just in life, when you're young, your job is to be taught. And as you get older, and as you become, wiser, so to speak, and you've been out in the world, and you've, contributed to society and made your mark and built something and produced things. So then you've grown up a little, you've learned a little, but until then, it is not your job as children to be out there telling the grown-ups what to do. Now, I'm not trying to say that the grown-ups are always acting in the best possible ways, but on the other hand, you definitely have to give some deference to a 50-year-old person who's been out there producing and making and contributing to society versus an 18-year-old pisher who sits in class and thinks that they're going to change the world by making a sign and holding it up for a camera. I mean, come on, really? And it is incumbent upon the adults in the room to tell them this. We're always concerned. We don't want to hurt their feelings or anything like this, but we have to tell them, listen, not in an offensive way, but you are still learning. You are still, learning the ropes of life and of the world. And things might seem so unfair and unjust, but sometimes you don't really get the bigger picture. And you don't know what's really going on. And, an interesting example of this that I heard recently is there was a person who, climate change, they call it now. Climate change is a big thing, right? Okay, great. So how do most people think they're going to really be on board and get on the climate change train? They're going to go and protest, or they're going to, I don't even know, make blogs about it, or, memes on Facebook. Okay, fine. Look, there's a guy, I wish I could remember his name. It's like something I can't even pronounce. There's a guy who basically invented it. He actually cared about climate change. So what did he do? He worked his butt off. And actually created a machine that can go, I guess he was a scuba diver or something, and he realized that most of the plastic and the trash, stuff like this, really hovers in a certain range of in the water. And so he created this machine, which I think should be probably coming out pretty soon, that will actually skim the top of the water, and it reaches down to that level of where the stuff is, and it pulls out I think like something like half of the garbage that's in the water. That's amazing. That's someone who cares about climate change. That's someone who's put in the time and the effort to contribute to the society. And I'm not saying that younger people can't do that, but as a whole, they haven't quite done it yet. And so, not as a whole, as a general rule. And so it's incumbent upon the adults to be teaching the children. And when the children are sort of getting out of hand, look, I have 7 kids. They get out of hand and they start to think, you know what? No, let me tell you, we did all these, these different psychology things on how to raise children right. And they tell you all these tricks. One of them, which was really funny, is the if then. Now, I'm sorry, I don't mean to use the college, just because my experience tends to be mostly with college students. So that was just an interesting example I'd heard recently. But take for my example of raising children. These psychology things, one of the things that they tell you is the tools in your basket is the if then, You don't say, or sorry, not if then, when then. You don't say if. If implies that maybe you won't do it, right? If you do it, so you could use if it's something you don't really care about. But if something they need to do is something you need to obey, then you say, when you do X, then, whatever, lunch will be served, or then we'll watch the video, or whatever it happens to be. Well, kids aren't stupid. What do they start doing? They start using it back on you. Well, no, when you do this, then I'll do that. And that's when this lesson really comes into play. Lahazhir Gedolim HaKatanim. It needs to be made clear. No, you are the child. It is not offensive to say to a child, you are a child. When you are older, you'll understand better what I'm doing or what this is about or whatever the situation happens to be. That's not offensive and it's not insulting. It is just a statement of reality. You are the child. I am the parent. Do not try to be the parent. First of all, you won't be very good at it. Second of all, that is just not your role right now. So we need to take the reins as adults, be the ones to set good examples for children. Number one is the best way to teach them. Be a good example and teach them the right way to act, the right way to behave, the right way to view the world, and that will help them mature into wonderful, beautiful adults who will then do the same for their children, and life will go on, the world will be a happy place, and God willing, Mashiach will come very soon. Chaim l'chaim, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and please feel free to continue the conversation with me on the Facebook page, Jews Did It First. You can email me, rabbi@jewishoswego.org. I'm also on Twitter @OswegoRabbi. Thanks so much. Shabbat Shalom, and until next week.